Hello and welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining for yet another session in the decision makers track. If you're coming straight from the federated API management talk, or you're coming from some of the lightning talks, this is another addition to a very important conversation when it pertains to API governance at the enterprise level. Specifically, open standards are key drivers. In fact, there is
I can't hear you, but don't know. I can get started, or
okay. Is that fine?
yeah, can hear you
All
now.
right. Well, it was bound to happen at some point. I guess the microphone got a little bit more tired than I did. So thank you so much. Sorry, apologies for that. No, I was just saying thank you for being here with us. Open standards can be a really, really key driver in the role that it plays for enforcing or even defining API governance strategies across organizations. Open Policy Agent, in this case, is a really important and valuable standard for you to consider, to understand, and hopefully implement at scale. So who better than Charlie from Styra to take us through this journey of why enterprise teams succeed with policy as code using OPA. So without further ado, take it away. And if you do have questions and anything, please feel free to use the chat and Q&A. I'll be back towards the end. But till then, take it away, Charlie.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for the intro. So yeah, as would have said, I'm Charlie from Styra. I'm going to be talking about Open Policy Agent, which is a project which has come out of Styra. It's a CNCF project now, and talking about how enterprise teams use OPA and why they choose to use it and what benefits they get from doing so. So yeah, first just a little bit about me. I work on the developer relations team at Styra. This involves quite a lot of different activities week by week. I spend a lot of time with our open source project on the open project itself, working with users and as people come along with issues and doing a lot of support for the community. I also spend a lot of time on our own open source. We have a number of open source projects in the OPA ecosystem, we call it, and going out to events and presenting on the project as well as I'm doing now. So that's a little bit about me. Hopefully, I've got some interesting things to share about how OPA plugs into different businesses. So um, the overview for today, I'm going to try and make sure we're all on the same page about some terminology, about what policy as code means, and what I mean when I talk about policy. And I'm going to talk about policy at enterprise scale and what that additional challenges that poses as well. And then I'm going to go on and show how and talk about some concrete examples of how people are using OPA to address these challenges and rise to them. Um, so yeah, let's get started. Policy as code. What are policies? What do I mean when I talk about policies? I think it's a good question to get started with. Everybody's got some ideas about what that might mean to them, what that might mean for their team and business, but I think it's good to get on the same page. So I think this is probably the most common thing that people first think of in our world, like particular types of access control policies. Only admins are allowed to do an action within a system, trying to, control access to different departments, different teams, and things like that. So like these are the kinds of things that we all understand and we all agree are policies. But I want you to sort of think about policies more generally. Like this is an example that would apply to an airline ticket booking system, at least in the Western world. Customers can't book plane seats in row 13. There are no row 13 seats available on most Western world planes anyway. This is a bit of a fun one. but it's topical, and I'd like to bring it up at this time of year. It's a product which can only be sold between the 1st of January and the first Sunday after the full moon that occurs on or after the spring equinox. And it's a bit of a tongue twister, but it's, I think, a good one, just to sort of define, like you can define with a policy that you can say in a single sentence how Easter eggs are sold, or a particular brand of Easter eggs, at least here in the UK. So, um, but it's just sort of trying to get you thinking. Like businesses are built on policies. It's not just about who can access which system. It's it's a codification of what businesses are doing. So I said codification, like um, you know, what is policy as code? We've talked so far. We've looked at policies expressed in natural language. Uh, Here's a policy that's expressed in natural language. Currently, only on-call members of the support team can trigger deployments to production at the weekend without review. So as a policy, you could say that to a colleague and they would understand what you meant. But policy as code is when you're able to express that policy using a policy language. This is an example of Rego, the policy language that you use in OPA in our project. Hopefully, you can see that it's fairly easy to read. We're not going to dig super into the language or anything today. This is more of a high level overview, but hopefully you can see that you can write expressive and readable policies in a policy language as well. So what are the benefits of policy as code? Like why do we actually want to do this? Many of us will be familiar with infrastructure as code, where you use configuration and programming code to define your infrastructure state and the benefits that comes from doing so. So with policy as code, many of the same benefits apply. You can have versioned configurations, version sets of policy, which can be rolled forward and rolled back, or audited by code reviewed by teams or different individuals. And you can create these versioned artifacts, these versioned policy artifacts, which you can reason about. You can know that policy was evaluated with a given version in time. Um, Policy as code can also help developers uh, focus on their own applications, because policy as code is a way that, with some other tools around it, allows you to externalize or abstract policy evaluation from individual teams' applications, such that um, organization policies or domain-specific policies can be enforced on an application by the platform context, rather than each individual team potentially working in many different languages needing to implement the same policy controls. So I think that that's a key thing. It helps people, can help developer teams focus on what actually matters about their applications and reduce wasted effort. Related to that is a central management of policies. So if policy as code is being used to deliver a sort of centralized policy feature function out of the platform, you can share that organizational policy and audit it and control it in a central, delegate control for it too in a central way, similar to how you might manage infrastructure or a larger platform, and granting resources to teams. You might grant particular control of a given policy to one team, and retain control of it with a central team, and that's something we'll see in some of our case studies. Again, similar to all of the standard examples of infrastructure as code, like you have access to coding tools, like high-tech tools to make sure that code is being tested, has been linted to comply with different rules that might be set internally. And to benefit from all of those same things as we talk about with programming code, with infrastructure as code, policy as code, that the same benefits apply. So we talked about policy, we talked about policy as code, to kind of set the scene a bit, but yeah, this is the title of the talk is about enterprise scale policy. What is it about the enterprise scale that makes doing some of this stuff more difficult? Um, I boiled it down to sort of three main areas, which I'll refer back to for the rest of the session. The first one is what I'm calling polyglot systems. So, um, this is around like the kind of disparate systems that large enterprises have from different teams or from kind of sprawl that's caused by different reasons. They have very strict auditing requirements. Large enterprises, because of the way that they operate, are often subject to a whole range of different auditing and compliance requirements, and have the risk of hefty fines if they fail to comply. And on top of that, they're often, operating at a large scale. They have a demand for low latencies, or they have strict budgets around cost and so on. So there are a whole number of different challenges that the enterprise environment poses on this kind of cool idea of doing policy as code. So digging into each of these in a little bit more detail, like why might an enterprise end up with many different languages and frameworks? Uh, when you get to a certain scale, often there's different teams with different areas of expertise, and they're just using the best tool for the job. It might be that the data science workloads are using Python because that's the tool that the team want to use. It's most appropriate. But when it comes to serving user requests, API requests, it might be written in Go or something else. Like the priorities are very different in those two use cases, but at the same time, they often have some overlap. It might be that staff users are authorized and authenticated in a similar way when accessing those systems, or it might be some other shared data set or something. They often don't work in isolation, and that can pose a challenge. In addition to that, like it might be siloed departments, but also acquisitions. Large companies are buying other companies, they're inheriting and trying to integrate tech from these other companies, and that can kind of, just as business as usual, can create this sprawl of different technologies and different things that are sometimes a challenge to integrate. On top of that, it takes a while for a company to grow to a given size, and with that passing of time, legacy code, legacy systems, data centers, and platforms often are present in the enterprise world. And when we're thinking about what defines an enterprise situation, often that is the case. So I mentioned auditing requirements. Like many people who are tuned in today will be will be aware of the different compliance frameworks that they are having to work with. Like these pose like very real requirements, very real threats as well on enterprises, and there's a real challenge in order to understand what each of them means for each team and each application, but also to deliver on the expectations that come with compliance in a standard way. Like delivering that audit data in a standard way consistently is really, really difficult. And it's not just about knowing who accessed it when, but also what policy and the data context of that policy was evaluated, granted that access. Um, and how could we replay it? How could we understand exactly why that happened? That to do that in a consistent way is typically a challenge. But it's also around how the policy has changed. So why did the data that allowed them access, or why did the policy that allowed them access change? Who created that policy version? What was different about it from the previous policy version that allowed that request to go through? So yeah, it's about both sides to kind of like the user activity and the internal activity. There needs to be a paper trail, and proving that across, the polyglot systems problem that I previously described as a real challenge. Yeah, and on top of that, you're trying to often deal with very low latency budgets, very large data sets, globally distributed users and services, and with strict cost constraints as well. And these are features that do come up in our case studies that we're just about to get to. So tools for teams, like I like to think of OPA as a tool which is very much meeting people where they're at. And I'll give a quick overview of OPA first, and then we can dig into some of the examples. So OPA, Open Policy Agent, is an open source general purpose policy engine. You can think of it as a tool which you can offload policy decisions to, and it is a tool for you to decouple, crucially, policy logic that may be resident in applications or systems, and to to bring that into a standard mode of policy evaluation. It's not a replacement for an API gateway. It's something that you might integrate with an API gateway in order to provide a policy functionality to that layer. And crucially, like the API gateway in the terminology that we use is it would be an enforcement point, a policy enforcement point, and OPA is a policy decision point. It's only responsible for making decisions and doing that one thing well. So let's look at how that works. This is a typical example of how you might integrate with OPA. So a service could be an API gateway, it could be a Teams application, makes a call out to OPA, and it sends it some information about the decision that's to be made. OPA uses the loaded policy and the data and responds with a decision. And at a high level, that's how any integration with OPA works. At the same time, OPA is sending audit logs about all of the data that is passing through it, all of the decisions it's made, all of the policy version changes that have happened, and the policy versions that were used for a given policy decision are all submitted in its audit logs. So, Polyglot systems, why is OPA helpful in this scenario? OPA is open for integration. Lots of different ways to integrate with OPA via REST API. You can use OPA in process, and there are other language and framework integrations. On top of that, there are lots of different patterns to integrate OPA. You can run it as a sidecar. You can run it next to API gateways. As I mentioned, in process, you can run it within the same container image as your applications, or you could even run it as a centralized service as well. Different trade-offs. So let's see how one customer were using it. This is a case study from Zalando, a large fashion retailer in Europe. They're operating at some fairly serious organizational scale, and in this presentation, they dig into how they used OPA. So here's a quick example of the scale that they're operating at: thousands of applications, thousands of engineers, and this poses a real challenge for them. When they're working with the number of applications that they have, they had been seeing that through the use of many different programming languages and frameworks, they were all configuring access in different ways. And they looked to OPA as a way to externalize that authorization check that they needed to make, and to use it to move to a common framework for all of their different applications teams. So the authorization was being done in a standard way everywhere and controlled, and control could be delegated centrally. That's a key thing that they really wanted to be able to do, was they wanted to have, as a central team, control over the organization-wide policies. But they also wanted to make sure that policy logic that was relevant to a given domain or a given application could still be owned by the teams themselves, so that domain knowledge was still available, but they retained control for the rollout process and the review process of policies that were applied everywhere. And those delegated policies were merged with the global organization policies as well. I'll provide the links to the different case studies at the end as well, so you don't need to take a picture of each one. So that's an example for the polyglot systems. Let's talk about auditing. We've talked about the challenges that auditing and compliance pose on enterprises. Now let's see how or what it is about OPA and auditing that works well for enterprises. So we talked about policy as code. You can version the code, rollouts, all of that good stuff, and also the audit data that's produced by the making of decisions from OPA. So that's the input data that was provided from the application, who was trying to do what, at what time, what about them, who are they, what roles do they have. But then the audit data from OPA also contains the policy version at that time and any data that was used as well as caller authentication to OPA if you're using it as a centralized system. So you've got a lot of information there to play with, and the purpose of these logs is to be able to provide a full picture of why any decision from any thousands of applications was made. So a customer of Styra, Capital One, like one of the key things they were looking for and how they were when they were looking for an OPA sort of management tool is to be able to deliver these detailed audit logs and compliance records, both of how the policy was changing, but as the decisions were being made as well. And it's similar to Zalando's use case, they were interested in standardizing and on OPA as part of a sort of wider effort to consolidate their tooling. Um, so I think that's another key part to the Capital One case with OPA as well. As you can imagine, Capital One as a financial company have a lot of different auditing requirements that they have to meet, and OPA helps them to do that. Zalando also, they make use of, or they need to provide similar uh, sets of data around how policies are changing, and they talk too about how they use version control to show how different policy versions are being rolled out and applied. The key thing, as I mentioned before, is around the delegation of that policy and maintaining central control of it. But it allows them to do peer review. And the other thing that I thought was interesting about their use case was that they not only used that audit data for compliance reasons, but also for operational reasons. So they would monitor the production of that audit data as part of their kind of operational monitoring, which I thought was a cool thing that they had done as well. So finally, I wanted to talk about optimization. What is it about OPA that is useful for like these high, very low latency use cases that enterprises often have, or very strict requirements around memory? And so many of you will have come across the Miro whiteboarding tool. They really needed to get the latency of their real-time system down, and even if it were tens of milliseconds, it would still be too slow. And they were able to integrate with OPA in process, allowed them to deliver authorization decisions on a very low latency budget. It's a quite technical post, but this is the link to the Miro Engineering blog post about that. I've also got there's another post here from Gusto. Uh, they were making calls to OPA. They were taking a round trip of around 3 milliseconds, but it was still too slow. And the reason is that they were making many hundreds of requests in a given operation. They weren't using it from an API gateway. It was an application that was calling to OPA, and they were able to get the performance of an individual query way down by working with us on a batch API for query evaluation to allow them to run many queries in parallel as part of a single request, while still getting all of the same decision logging functionality that would have been there had they made them individually. And so this is also an important feature of the Zalando use case. They're embedding OPA directly within their API gateway instances. They have their own project called Skipper, and that allows them to deliver those policy decisions with very minimal latency. They also cite that this helps them keep the cost of the platform feature down by including OPA within a given instance or an existing instance. It helps them keep the cost down of their whole system. So just a quick overview. We talked about polyglot systems, the auditing requirements, and the optimization complexity that's posed. There's these different case studies. I'm going to show you the links to these just now. The Capital one is the least technical, but the other ones are more on the kind of engineering content level. But yeah, definitely take a look into them. And yeah, I think there's a lot of good content there about what does policy as code look like at enterprise scale. If you're looking for a more general overview, this is the book on policy as code. I think is perhaps obviously a good overview of the whole topic and all of these different aspects to the problem that I've talked about today. So you can check that out as well. So yeah, that's all I've got. I can see there's one question in the chat which I'll read in just a moment, but if you want to drop me a message or anything, these are my links. So yeah, fire any. Oh, there's a it's a comment. Okay,
It's a
I
comment.
worked on
Yeah,
a
it's
project
pretty
where we used
powerful
OPA.
comment. Yeah, go.
Oh, okay, yep. And a Lambda authorizer. We were able to get a system. We opted for the Go SDK. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, like the Go SDK, the high level Go SDK is a great way to integrate OPA. I think if you've got that option, it's fantastic. It lets you run fully fledged functionality OPA within your application, and I think this is like a really powerful pattern in that you get super low latency, but you still get all of the same goodness around policy reloading, reloading of data, decision logging. You get all of that functionality, but it's within your application. There's no kind of operational overhead of running a sidecar or calling out over the network to an external service. I think it's a great way to integrate.
Awesome. If there are any other questions, then feel free to put that in the chat or the Q&A section. One question that I personally have, and again, I'm a big fan of OPA. I've been following along with for a while now. It's integrated into the Tyke API management platform as well. I think there was a reason because we knew how powerful it was as a policy management standard. But sometimes the pushback that we've heard or a complaint that we've heard is around the use of Rego in some cases where it's like, oh, is there a little bit of barrier to entry because it's an additional thing that you need to learn and perhaps maintain a bit of a knowledge around. There might not be a common understanding across incoming developers or expanding teams. So is that something that you've seen as a common complaint across? And if so, how do you sort of mitigate something like that?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's not the first time I've heard that one, but um, yeah, like going back to the Zalando use case, they work closely with the teams to help them get up to speed. They provide examples and like work with people to bring them up to speed. But I think like the way I would like to answer this question is that a lot of people's experience of Rego is from 5 years ago or even more, and like in 2025, the situation is a lot better. I have some. I had actually had a few extra more sort of developer focused sort of next steps for people. Like I think go and have a look at some of these examples that I've worked on this section of the site last year to help people like learn Rego from languages that they're familiar with, like showing what Rego looks like versus the language they might be more familiar with. But also, I think like the most important thing really is that we have invested a lot in the developer tools in the last 18 months now. All of the things that you would expect from a mature programming environment are there. We have linting, we have step-by-step debugging, we have live code evaluation. It's it's a hell of a lot better than it was 5 years ago, so you should definitely check it out. Like the Visual Studio Code plugin is our kind of first class support. But yeah, do check it out. I think like the way that you help developers with Rego is by making the developer tooling better. Like that's maybe not really a surprise, but like that's what we've done, and we've had great feedback from that.
I would agree. Yeah, absolutely. Great answer there. Um, we don't have time for too much. I think there's just 1 minute left. There is an anonymous attendee who's asked a question about developers are becoming integrated with roles like BSOs. I don't think I've heard this one. I have heard about CSOs before, but not BSOs, but maybe it's a new role. Is this an intuitive tool for that role to create code in an automated way or in an AI-based way? Like is this an intuitive tool perhaps for
Yeah, for more of a business user, like how does a
business
business
user?
user
Yeah.
write policy? Yeah, so like it's I mean we've perhaps all experienced slightly mixed results with AI code generation, but it's not something that we have in the open source, but as part of Styra's product, we do have with when you sort of set some guardrails around like what the policy could actually ever do, from natural language, we do have an AI policy builder that's kind of in early access mode. So like we're definitely going after that use case. Like we are very aware that like policy punches upwards in terms of like who want people need to be able to read it. They need to be able to understand the changes, even if they're not writing the code themselves. So yeah, like we are, it's something that we're definitely working on, and actually we have seen pretty good results with some AI generation, but with some particular kind of guardrails around like what's possible, has been actually quite effective. So yeah, do I haven't got a link for it, but yeah, just look, it's called the AI Policy Builder.
All right. We are at time, unfortunately. Thank you so much again, Charlie. This has been a fantastic session. Once again, one of my favorite open standards at this point of time, just because of the sheer power that it wields when it comes to API governance conversation. So appreciate the presentation. Thank you everyone for being engaged and participating in Q&A. We are going to take a final break before we start off our closing keynotes, starting off with James Higginbotham, followed by our own CEO, Martin Boer, about AI governance in action. And then it all comes down to the final session, which is a big thank you to everybody. But over to James Higginbotham session in about 4 minutes time. Thank you so much, Charlie. This has been a pleasure.
Thank you.
I'll see
Yeah,
everyone in the
have a
next
good
one.
one.
Cheers.